This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Aeneid of Virgil, translated by John Dryden. Book 12. When Turnus saw the Latins leave the field, their armies broken and their courage quelled, himself become the mark of public spite, his honour questioned for the promised fight, the more he was with vulgar hate oppressed, the more his fury boiled within his breast. He roused his vigour for the last debate, and raised his haughty soul to meet his fate. As, when the swains the Libyan lion chase, he makes a sour retreat, nor mends his pace, but, if the pointed javelin pierce his side, the lordly beast returns with double pride. He wrenches out the steel, he roars for pain, his sides he lashes, and erects his mane. So Turnus fares, his eyeballs flash with fire, through his wide nostrils clouds of smoke expire. Trembling with rage around the court he ran, at length approach'd the king, and thus began: "No more excuses or delays. I stand in arms prepar'd to combat, hand to hand, this base deserter of his native land. The Trojan, by his word, is bound to take the same conditions which himself did make. Renew the truce, the solemn rites prepare, and to my single virtue trust the war. The Latians unconcern'd shall see the fight; this arm unaided shall assert your right. Then, if my prostrate body press the plain, to him the crown and beauteous bride remain." To whom the king sedately thus replied: "Brave youth, the more your valour has been tried, the more becomes it us, with due respect, to weigh the chance of war, which you neglect. You want not wealth, or a successive throne, or cities which your arms have made your own. My towns and treasures are at your command, and stored with blooming beauties is my land. Laurentum more than one Lavinia sees, unmarried, fair, of noble families. Now let me speak, and you with patience hear, things which perhaps may grate a lover's ear, but sound advice, proceeding from a heart sincerely yours, and free from fraudful art. The gods by signs have manifestly shown no prince Italian born should heir my throne. Oft have our augurs in prediction skill'd, and oft our priests foreign son reveal'd. Yet one by worth that cannot be withstood, bribed by my kindness to my kindred blood, urged by my wife who would not be denied, I promised my Lavinia for your bride. Her from her plighted lord by force I took, all ties of treaties and of honour broke. On your account I waged an impious war, with what success 'tis needless to declare. I and my subjects feel, and you have had your share. Twice vanquish'd while in bloody fields we strive, scarce in our walls we keep our hopes alive. The rolling flood runs warm with human gore, the bones of Latians blanch the neighb'ring shore. Why put I not an end to this debate, still unresolved, and still a slave to fate? If Turnus' death a lasting peace can give, why should I not procure it whilst you live? Should I to doubtful arms your youth betray, what would my kinsmen, the Rutulians, say? And, should you fall in fight, which Heav'n defend, how curse the cause which hasten'd to his end, the daughter's lover and the father's friend? Weigh in your mind the various chance of war, pity your parent's age, and ease his care." Such balmy words he pour'd, but all in vain; the proffer'd medicine but provoked the pain. The wrathful youth, disdaining the relief, with intermitting sobs thus vents his grief: "The care, O best of fathers, which you take for my concerns, at my desire forsake. Permit me not to languish out my days, but make the best exchange of life for praise. This arm, this lance, can well dispute the prize, and the blood follows where the weapon flies. His goddess mother is not near, to shroud the flying coward with an empty cloud. But now the queen, who fear'd for Turnus' life, and loathed the hard conditions of the strife, held him by force, and, dying in his death, in these sad accents gave her sorrow breath. "O Turnus, I adjure thee by these tears, and whate'er price Amata's honour bears within thy breast, since thou art all my hope, my sickly mind's repose, my sinking age's prop, since on the safety of thy life alone depends Latinus and the Latian throne, refuse me not this one, this only prayer, to waive the combat and pursue the war. Whatever chance attends this fatal strife, think it includes in thine Amata's life. I cannot live a slave, or see my throne usurped by strangers, or a Trojan son." At this, a flood of tears Lavinia shed, a crimson blush her beauteous face o'erspread, varying her cheeks by turns with white and red. The driving colours, never at a stay, run here and there, and flush and fade away. Delightful change! Thus Indian ivory shows, which with the bordering paint of purple glows, or lilies damask'd by the neighbouring rose. The lover gazed, and, burning with desire, the more he looked, the more he fed the fire. Revenge, and jealous rage, and secret spite roll in his breast, and rouse him to the fight. Then fixing on the queen his ardent eyes, firm to his first intent, he thus replies: "O mother, do not by your tears prepare such boding omens, and prejudge the war. Resolv'd on fight, I am no longer free to shun my death, if heav'n my death decree." Then, turning to the herald, thus pursues: "Go greet the Trojan with ungrateful news. Denounce from me, that, when tomorrow's light shall gild the heavens, he need not urge the fight. The Trojan and Rutulian troops no more shall dye with mutual blood the Latian shore. Our single swords the quarrel shall decide, and to the victor be the beauteous bride." He said, and, striding on with speedy pace, he sought his coursers of the Thracian race. At his approach they toss their heads on high, and, proudly neighing, promise victory. The sires of these Oreithyia sent from far, to grace Pilumnus when he went to war. The drifts of Thracian snows were scarce so white, nor northern winds in fleetness match'd their flight. Officious grooms stand ready by his side, and some with combs their flowing manes divide, and others stroke their chests, and gently soothe their pride. He sheath'd his limbs in arms, a temper'd mass of golden metal those, and mountain brass. Then to his head his glittering helm he tied, and girt his faithful falchion to his side. In his Aetnaean forge the god of fire that falchion labour'd for the hero's sire. Immortal keenness on the blade bestow'd, and plunged it hissing in the Stygian flood. Propp'd on a pillar which the ceiling bore, was placed the lance Auruncan Actor wore, which with such force he brandish'd in his hand, the tough ash trembled like an osier wand. Then cried: "O pond'rous spoil of Actor slain, and never yet by Turnus toss'd in vain! Fail not this day thy wonted force, but go, sent by this hand, to pierce the Trojan foe. Give me to tear his corslet from his breast, and from that eunuch head to rend the crest, dragg'd in the dust his frizzled hair to soil, hot from the vexing iron, and smear'd with fragrant oil." Thus while he raves, from his wide nostrils flies a fiery steam, and sparkles from his eyes. So fares the bull in his lov'd female's sight. Proudly he bellows, and preludes the fight. He tries his goring horns against a tree, and meditates his absent enemy. He pushes at the winds, he digs the strand with his black hoofs, and spurns the yellow sand. Nor less the Trojan in his Lemnian arms to future fight his manly courage warms. He whets his fury, and with joy prepares to terminate at once the ling'ring wars. To cheer his chiefs and tender son, relates what Heav'n had promis'd, and expounds the fates. Then to the Latian king he sends, to cease the rage of arms, and ratify the peace. The morn ensuing from the mountain's height Had scarcely spread the skies with rosy light. Th' ethereal coursers, bounding from the sea, from out their flaming nostrils breathed the day. When now the Trojan and Rutulian guard in friendly labour join'd, the list prepar'd. Beneath the walls they measure out the space, then sacred altars rear on sods of grass, where with religious their common gods they place. In purest white the priests their heads attire, and living waters bear, and holy fire, and o'er their linen hoods and shaded hair long twisted wreaths of sacred vervain wear. In order issuing from the town appears the Latin legion, arm'd with pointed spears; and from the fields, advancing on a line, the Trojan and the Tuscan forces join. Their various arms afford a pleasing sight; a peaceful train they seem, in peace prepar'd for fight. Betwixt the ranks the proud commanders ride, glittering with gold, and vests in purple dyed. Here Mnestheus, author of the Memmian line, and there Messapus, born of seed divine. The sign is given, and round the listed space each man in order fills his proper place. Reclining on their ample shields they stand, and fix their pointed lances in the sand. Now, studious of the sight, a num'rous throng of either sex promiscuous, old and young, swarm the town. By those who rest behind, the gates and walls and houses' tops are lined. Meantime the Queen of Heav'n beheld the sight, with eyes unpleased, from Mount Albano's height, since call'd Albano by succeeding fame, but then an empty hill without a name. She thence survey'd the field, the Trojan powers, the Latian squadrons, and Laurentine towers. Then thus the goddess of the skies bespoke, with sighs and tears, the goddess of the lake, King Turnus' sister, once a lovely maid, ere to the lust of lawless Jove betray'd. Compress'd by force, but by the grateful god now made the Naias of the neighb'ring flood. "O nymph, the pride of living lakes," said she, "O most renown'd and most belov'd by me! Long hast thou known, nor need I to record the wanton sallies of my wand'ring lord. Of every Latian fair whom Jove misled to mount by stealth my violated bed, to thee alone I grudg'd not his embrace, but gave a part of heav'n, and an unenvied place. Now learn from me thy near approaching grief, nor think my wishes want to thy relief. While fortune favour'd, nor heav'n's king denied, to lend my succour to the Latian side, I sav'd thy brother and the sinking state; but now he struggles with unequal fate, and goes, with gods averse, o'ermatch'd in might, to meet inevitable death in fight. Nor must I break the truce, nor can sustain the sight. Thou, if thou dar'st thy present aid supply, it well becomes a sister's care to try." At this the lovely nymph, with grief oppress'd, thrice tore her hair, and beat her comely breast. To whom Saturnia thus: "Thy tears are late; Haste, snatch him, if he can be snatch'd from fate. New tumults kindle, violate the truce. Who knows what changeful fortune may produce? 'Tis not a crime to attempt what I decree; or, if it were, discharge the crime on me." She said, and, sailing on the winged wind, left the sad nymph suspended in her mind. And now pomp the peaceful kings appear. 4 steeds the chariot of Latinus bear. 12 golden beams around his temples play, to mark his lineage from the god of day. 2 snowy coursers Turnus' chariot yoke, and in his hand 2 massy spears he shook. Then issued from the camp, in arms divine, Aeneas, author of the Roman line; and by his side Ascanius took his place, the second hope of Rome's immortal race. Adorned in white, a reverend priest appears, And offerings to the flaming altars bears, A porket, and a lamb that never suffer'd shears. Then to the rising sun he turns his eyes, And strews the beasts design'd for sacrifice with salt and meal. With like officious care he marks their foreheads, and he clips their hair. Betwixt their horns the purple wine he sheds, with the same gen'rous juice the flame he feeds. Aeneas then unsheath'd his shining sword, And thus with pious prayers the gods ador'd: "All-seeing sun, and thou, Ausonian soil, For which I have sustain'd so long a toil; Thou, king of heav'n, and thou, the queen of air, Propitious now, and reconcil'd by pray'r; Thou, god of war, whose unresisted sway The labours and events of arms obey; Ye living fountains, and ye running floods, All pow'rs of ocean, all ethereal gods, Hear and bear record. If I fall in field, Or, recreant in the fight, to Turnus yield, My Trojans shall increase Evander's town; Ascanius shall renounce th' Ausonian crown. All claims, all questions of debate shall cease, Nor he nor they with force infringe the peace. But, if my juster arms prevail in fight, As sure they shall, if I divine aright, My Trojans shall not o'er th' Italians reign; Both equal, both unconquer'd shall remain, Join'd in their laws, their lands, and their abodes. I ask but altars for my weary gods. The care of those religious rites be mine. The crown to King Latinus I resign. His be the sov'reign sway; nor will I share His pow'r in peace, or his command in war. For me, my friends another town shall frame, And bless the rising tow'rs with fair Lavinia's name." Thus he. Then, with erected eyes and hands, The Latian king before his altar stands. "By the same heav'n," said he, "and earth, and main, And all the pow'rs that all the three contain; By hell below, and by that upper god, Whose thunder signs the peace, who seals it with his nod; So let Latona's double offspring hear, And double-fronted Janus, what I swear. I touch the sacred altars, touch the flames, And all those pow'rs attest, and all their names. Whatever chance befall on either side, No term of time this union shall divide; No force, no fortune shall my vows unbind, Or shake the steadfast tenor of my mind. Not tho' the circling seas should break their bound, O'erflow the shores, or sap the solid ground; Not tho' the lamps of heav'n their spheres forsake, Hurl'd down and hissing in the nether lake; Even as this royal scepter (for he bore A scepter in his hand) shall never more Shoot out in branches, or renew the birth, An orphan now, cut from the mother earth By the keen axe, dishonour'd of its hair, And cas'd in brass, for Latian kings to bear." When thus in public view the peace was tied, With solemn vows, and sworn on either side, All dues perform'd which holy rites require, The victim beasts are slain before the fire, The trembling entrails from their bodies torn, And the fatten'd flames in chargers borne. Already the Rutulians deem their man O'ermatch'd in arms, before the fight began. First rising fears are whisper'd thro' the crowd; Then, gath'ring sound, they murmur more aloud. Now, side to side, they measure with their eyes The champions' bulk, their sinews, and their size. The nearer they approach, the more is known Th' apparent disadvantage of their own. Turnus himself appears in public sight, Conscious of fate, desponding of the fight. Slowly he moves, and at his altar stands, With eyes dejected, and with trembling hands; And, while he mutters undistinguish'd prayers, A livid deadness in his cheeks appears. With anxious pleasure, when Juturna view'd th' increasing fright of the mad multitude, when their short sighs and thick'ning sobs she heard, and found their ready minds for change prepar'd, dissembling her immortal form, she took Camertus' mien, his habit and his look. A chief of ancient blood, in arms well known, was his great sire, and he his greater son. His shape assum'd, amid the ranks she ran, and, humouring their first motions, thus began: "For shame, Rutulians! Can you bear the sight Of one exposed for all, in single fight? Can we, before the face of heav'n, confess Our courage colder, or our numbers less? View all the Trojan host, th' Arcadian band, And Tuscan army; count 'em as they stand. Undaunted to the battle if we go, Scarce every second man will share a foe. Turnus, 'tis true, in this unequal strife, Shall lose with honour his devoted life, Or change it rather for immortal fame, Succeeding to the gods from whence he came. But you, a servile and inglorious band, For foreign lords shall sow your native land. Those fruitful fields your fighting fathers gain'd, Which have so long their lazy sons sustain'd." With words like these she carried her design. A rising murmur runs along the line. Then ev'n the city troops and Latians, tir'd with tedious war, seem with new souls inspir'd. Their champion's fate with pity they lament, And of the league so lately sworn repent. Nor fails the goddess to foment the rage With lying wonders and a false presage, But adds a sign, which, present their eyes, Inspires new courage and a glad surprise. For, sudden, in the fiery tracts above, Appears in pomp th' imperial bird of Jove. A plump of fowl he spies, that swim the lakes, And o'er their heads his sounding pinions shakes. Then, stooping on the fairest of the train, In his strong talons truss'd a silver swan. Th' Italians wonder at th' unusual sight; But, while he lags, and labours in his flight, Behold the dastard fowl return anew, And with united force the foe pursue. Clamorous around the royal hawk they fly, And, thick'ning in a cloud, o'ershade the sky. They cuff, they scratch, they cross his airy course, Nor can th' encumber'd bird sustain their force. But, vex'd, not vanquish'd, drops the pond'rous prey, And, lighten'd of his burthen, wings his way. Th' Ausonian bands with shouts salute the sight, Eager of action, and demand the fight. Then King Tolumnius, vers'd in augurs' arts, Cries out, and thus his boasted skill imparts: "At length 'tis granted what I long desir'd. This is what my frequent vows requir'd. Ye gods, I take your omen, and obey. Advance, my friends, and charge; I lead the way. These are the foreign foes, whose impious band Like that rapacious bird infest our land. But soon, like him, they shall be forc'd to sea, By strength united, and forego the prey. Your timely succour to your country bring; Haste to the rescue, and redeem your king." He said, and, pressing onward thro' the crew, Pois'd in his lifted arm, his lance he threw. The winged weapon, whistling in the wind, Came driving on, nor miss'd the mark design'd. At once the cornel rattled in the skies; At once tumultuous shouts and clamours rise. 9 brothers in a goodly band there stood, Born of Arcadian mix'd with Tuscan blood. Gylippus' sons. The fatal jav'lin flew, aim'd at the midmost of the friendly crew. A passage thro' the jointed arms it found, Just where the belt was to the body bound, And struck the gentle youth extended on the ground. Then, fir'd with pious rage, the gen'rous train Run madly forward, to revenge the slain. And some with eager haste their jav'lins throw, And some with sword in hand assault the foe. The wish'd insult the Latine troops embrace, And meet their ardour in the middle space. The Trojans, Tuscans, and Arcadian line With equal courage obviate their design. Peace leaves the violated fields, and hate Both armies urges to their mutual fate. With impious haste their altars are o'erturn'd, The sacrifice half broil'd and half unburn'd. Thick storms of steel from either army fly, And clouds of clashing darts obscure the sky. Brands from the fire are missive weapons made, With chargers, bowls, and all the priestly trade. Latinus, frighted, hastens from the fray, And bears his unregarded gods away. These on their horses vault, those yoke the car, the rest with swords on high run headlong to the war. Messapus, eager to confound the peace, spurr'd his hot courser thro' the fighting priests. At King Aulestes, by his purple known, a Tuscan prince, and by his regal crown, and with a shock encount'ring bore him down. Backward he fell, and, as his fate design'd, the ruins of an altar were behind. There, pitching on his shoulders and his head, amid the scattering fires he lay supinely spread. The beamy spear, descending from above, his cuirass pierc'd, and thro' his body drove. Then, with a scornful smile, the victor cries, "The gods have found a fitter sacrifice." Greedy of spoils, th' Italians strip the dead of his rich armour, and uncrown his head. Priest Corynaeus arm'd his better hand from his own altar with a blazing brand, and as Ebusus with a thund'ring pace advanced to battle, dash'd it on his face. His bristly beard shines out with sudden fires, the crackling crop a noisome scent expires. Following the blow, he seiz'd his curling crown with his left hand, his other cast him down. The prostrate body with his knees he press'd, and plunged his holy poniard in his breast. While Podalirius with his sword pursued the shepherd Alsus thro' the flying crowd. Swiftly he turns, and aims a deadly blow, full on the front of his unwary foe. The broad axe enters with a crashing sound, and cleaves the chin with one continued wound. Warm blood and mingled brains besmear his arms around. An iron sleep his stupid eyes oppress'd, and seal'd their heavy lids in endless rest. But good Aeneas rush'd amid the bands. Bare was his head, and naked were his hands, in sign of truce. Then thus he cries aloud: "What sudden rage, what new desire of blood inflames your alter'd minds? O Trojans, cease from impious arms, nor violate the peace. By human sanctions, and by laws divine, the terms are all agreed: the war is mine. Dismiss your fears, and let the fight ensue. This hand alone shall right the gods and you. Our injur'd altars, and their broken vow, to this avenging sword the faithless Turnus owe." Thus while he spoke, unmindful of defence, a winged arrow struck the pious prince. But, whether from some human hand it came, or hostile god, is left unknown by fame. No human hand or hostile god was found to boast the triumph of so base a wound. When Turnus saw the Trojan quit the plain, his chiefs dismay'd, his troops a fainting train, th' unhoped event his heightened soul inspires. At once his arms and coursers he requires. Then with a leap his lofty chariot gains, and with a ready hand assumes the reins. He drives impetuous, and where'er he goes, he leaves behind a lane of slaughter'd foes. These his lance reaches; over those he rolls his rapid car, and crushes out their souls. In vain the vanquish'd fly; the victor sends the dead men's weapons at their living friends. Thus on the banks of Hebrus' freezing flood, the god of battles, in his angry mood, clashing his sword against his brazen shield, let loose the reins, and scours along the field. Before the wind his fiery coursers fly; groans the sad earth, resounds the rattling sky. Wrath, terror, treason, tumult, and despair, dire faces and deform'd, surround the car. Friends of the god, and followers of the war, with fury not unlike nor less disdain, exulting Turnus flies along the plain. His smoking horses at their utmost speed he lashes on, and urges o'er the dead. Their fetlocks run with blood, and, when they bound, the gore and gath'ring dust are dash'd around. Thamyris and Pholus, masters of the war, he kill'd at hand, but Sthenelus afar. From far the sons of Imbracus he slew, Glaucus and Lades of the Lycian crew, both taught to fight on foot, in battle join'd, or mount the courser that outstrips the wind. Meantime Eumedes, vaunting in the field, new fir'd the Trojans, and their foes repell'd. This son of Dolon bore his grandsire's name, but emulated more his father's fame. His guileful father sent a nightly spy the Grecian camp and order to descry. hard enterprise. And well he might require Achilles' car and horses for his hire. But, met upon the scout, th' Aetolian prince in death bestow'd a juster recompense. Fierce Turnus view'd the Trojan from afar, and launch'd his javelin from his lofty car. Then lightly leaping down pursued the blow, and pressing with his foot his prostrate foe, wrench'd from his feeble hold the shining sword, and plung'd it in the bosom of its lord. "Possess," said he, "the fruit of all thy pains, and measure at thy length our Latian plains. Thus are my foes rewarded by my hand; thus may they build their town, and thus enjoy the land." Then Dares, Butes, Sybaris he slew, whom o'er his neck his flound'ring courser threw, as when loud Boreas with his blust'ring train stoops from above, incumbent on the main. Where'er he flies, he drives the wrack before, and rolls the billows on the Aegean shore. So where resistless Turnus takes his course, the scatter'd squadrons bend before his force. His crest of horse's hair is blown behind by adverse air, and rustles in the wind. This haughty Phaegus saw with high disdain, and, as the chariot roll'd along the plain, light from the ground he leapt, and seiz'd the rein. This hung in air, he still retain'd his hold, the coursers frighted, and their course controll'd. The lance of Turnus reach'd him as he hung, and pierc'd his plated arms, but pass'd along, and only razed the skin. He turn'd, and held against his threat'ning foe his ample shield, then call'd for aid; but, while he cried, in vain the chariot bore him backward on the plain. He lies revers'd; the victor king descends, and strikes so justly where his helmet ends, he lops the head. The Latian fields are drunk with streams that issue from the bleeding trunk. While he triumphs, and while the Trojans yield, the wounded prince is forc'd to leave the field. Strong Mnestheus and Achates often tried, and young Ascanius, weeping by his side, conduct him to his tent. Scarce can he rear his limbs from earth, supported on his spear. Resolv'd in mind, regardless of the smart, he tugs with both his hands, and breaks the dart. The steel remains. No readier way he found to draw the weapon than to enlarge the wound. Eager of fight, impatient of delay, he begs, and his unwilling friends obey. Iapis was at hand to prove his art, whose blooming youth so fir'd Apollo's heart, that for his love he proffer'd to bestow his tuneful harp and his unerring bow. The pious youth, more studious how to save his aged sire, now sinking to the grave, preferr'd the pow'r of plants, and silent praise of healing arts, before Phoebean bays. Propp'd on his lance the pensive hero stood, and heard and saw unmov'd the mourning crowd. The fam'd physician tucks his robes around with ready hands, and hastens to the wound. With gentle touches he performs his part, this way and that soliciting the dart, and exercises all his heav'nly art. All soft'ning simples known of sov'reign use he presses out, and pours their noble juice. These first infus'd, to lenify the pain, he tugs with pincers, but he tugs in vain. Then to the patron of his art he pray'd; the patron of his art refus'd his aid. Meantime the war approaches to the tents; the alarm grows hotter, and the noise augments. The driving dust proclaims the danger near, and first their friends, and then their foes appear. Their friends retreat, their foes pursue the rear. The camp is fill'd with terror and affright; the hissing shafts within the trench alight. An undistinguish'd noise ascends the sky, the shouts of those who kill, and groans of those who die. But now the goddess mother, mov'd with grief, and pierc'd with pity, hastens her relief. A branch of healing dittany she brought, which in the Cretan fields with care she sought. Rough is the stern which woolly leafs surround, the leafs with flowers, the flowers with purple crown'd. Well known to wounded goats, a sure relief, to draw the pointed steel, and ease the grief. This Venus brings, in clouds involved, and brews th' extracted liquor with ambrosian dews, and odorous panacee. Unseen she stands, temp'ring the mixture with her heav'nly hands, and pours it in a bowl, already crown'd with juice of medicinal herbs prepar'd to bathe the wound. The leech, unknowing of superior art, which aids the cure, with this foments the part, and in a moment ceas'd the raging smart. Stanch'd is the blood, and in the bottom stands the steel, but scarcely touch'd with tender hands, moves up and follows of its own accord, and health and vigour are at once restor'd. Iapis first perceiv'd the closing wound, and first the footsteps of a god he found. "Arms, arms!" he cries, "the sword and shield prepare, and send the willing chief renew'd to war. This is no mortal work, no cure of mine, Nor art's effect, but done by hands divine. Some god our gen'ral to the battle sends, Some god preserves his life for greater ends." The hero arms in haste; his hands enfold His thighs with cuishes of refulgent gold. Inflam'd to fight, and rushing to the field, that hand sustaining the celestial shield, this grips the lance, and with such vigour shakes, that to the rest the beamy weapon quakes. Then with a close embrace he strain'd his son, and kissing thro' his helmet, thus begun: "My son, from my example learn the war, In camps to suffer, and in fields to dare. But happier chance than mine attend thy care. This day my hand thy tender age shall shield, And crown with honours of the conquer'd field. Thou, in thy riper years, shall send thee forth To toils of war: be mindful of my worth. Assert thy birthright, and in arms be known For Hector's nephew, and Aeneas' son." He said, and, striding, issued on the plain. Antaeus and Mnestheus, and a num'rous train, Attend his steps; the rest their weapons take, And, crowding to the field, the camp forsake. A cloud of blinding dust is rais'd around, Labours beneath their feet the trembling ground. Now Turnus, posted on a hill, from far Beheld the progress of the moving war. With him the Latins view'd the cover'd plains, And the chill blood ran backward in their veins. Juturna saw th' advancing troops appear, And heard the hostile sound, and fled for fear. Aeneas leads, and draws a sweeping train, Clos'd in their ranks, and pouring on the plain. As when a whirlwind, rushing to the shore From the mid-ocean, drives the waves before. The painful hind with heavy heart foresees The flatted fields, and slaughter of the trees. With like impetuous rage the prince appears Before his doubled front, nor less destruction bears. And now both armies shock in open field. Osiris is by strong Thymbraeus kill'd. Archetius, Ufens, Epulon are slain, All fam'd in arms, and of the Latian train, By Gyas, Mnestheus, and Achates' hand. The fatal augur falls, by whose command The truce was broken, and whose lance, imbrued With Trojan blood, th' unhappy fight renew'd. Loud shouts and clamours rend the liquid sky, And o'er the field the frighted Latins fly. The prince disdains the dastards to pursue, Nor moves to meet in arms the fighting few. Turnus alone amid the dusky plain He seeks, and to the combat calls in vain. Juturna heard, and, seiz'd with mortal fear, Forc'd from the beam her brother's charioteer. Assumes his shape, his armour, and his mien, And like Metiscus in his seat is seen. As the black swallow near the palace plies, O'er empty courts, and under arches flies, Now hawks aloft, now skims along the flood, To furnish her loquacious nest with food; So drives the rapid goddess o'er the plains. The smoking horses run with loosen'd reins. She steers a various course among the foes; Now here, now there, her conqu'ring brother shows. Now with a straight, now with a wheeling flight, She turns and bends, but shuns the single fight. Aeneas, fir'd with fury, breaks the crowd, And seeks his foe, and calls by name aloud. He runs within a narrower ring, And tries to stop the chariot, but the chariot flies. If he but gain a glimpse, Juturna fears, and far away the Daunian hero bears. What should he do? Nor arts nor arms avail, and various cares in vain his mind assail. The great Messapus, thund'ring thro' the field, in his left hand 2 pointed jav'lins held. Encount'ring on the prince, one dart he drew, and with unerring aim and utmost vigour threw. Aeneas saw it come, and, stooping low beneath his buckler, shunn'd the threat'ning blow. The weapon hiss'd above his head, and tore the waving plume which on his helm he wore. Forc'd by this hostile act, and fir'd with spite, that flying Turnus still declin'd the fight. The prince, whose piety had long repell'd his inborn ardour, now invades the field; invokes the powers of violated peace, their rites and injur'd altars to redress. Then, to his rage abandoning the rein, with blood and slaughter'd bodies fills the plain. What god can tell, what numbers can display the various labours of that fatal day? What chiefs and champions fell on either side, in combat slain, or by what deaths they died? Whom Turnus, whom the Trojan hero kill'd? Who shar'd the fame and fortune of the field? Jove, couldst thou view, and not avert thy sight, 2 jarring nations join'd in cruel fight, whom leagues of lasting love so shortly shall unite. Aeneas first Rutulian Sucro found, whose valour made the Trojans quit their ground. Betwixt his ribs the jav'lin drove so just, it reach'd his heart, nor needs a second thrust. Now Turnus at 2 blows 2 brethren slew. First from his horse fierce Amycus he threw. Then, leaping on the ground, on foot assail'd Diores, and in equal fight prevail'd. Their lifeless trunks he leaves upon the place, their heads distilling gore his chariot grace. 3 cold on earth the Trojan hero threw, whom without respite at one charge he slew. Cethegus, Tanais, Tagus fell oppress'd, and sad Onythus added to the rest, of Theban blood, whom Peridia bore. Turnus 2 brothers from the Lycian shore, and from Apollo's fane, to battle sent, o'erthrew, nor Phoebus could their fate prevent. Peaceful Menoetes after these he kill'd, who long had shunn'd the dangers of the field. On Lerna's lake a silent life he led, and with his nets and angle earn'd his bread. Nor pompous cares, nor palaces he knew, but wisely from th' infectious world withdrew. Poor was his house; his father's painful hand discharg'd his rent, and plow'd another's land. As flames among the lofty woods are thrown on diff'rent sides, and both by winds are blown, the laurels crackle in the sputtering fire, the frighted sylvans from their shades retire. Or as 2 neighbouring torrents fall from high, rapid they run, the foamy waters fry. They roll to sea with unresisted force, and down the rocks precipitate their course. Not with less rage the rival heroes take their diff'rent ways, nor less destruction make. With spears afar, with swords at hand they strike, and zeal of slaughter fires their souls alike. Like them, their dauntless men maintain the field, and hearts are pierc'd, unknowing how to yield. They blow for blow return, and wound for wound, and heaps of bodies raise the level ground. Murranus, boasting of his blood that springs from a long royal race of Latian kings, is by the Trojan from his chariot thrown, crush'd with the weight of an unwieldy stone. Betwixt the wheels he fell; the wheels that bore his living load his dying body tore. His starting steeds, to shun the glitt'ring sword, paw down his trampled limbs, forgetful of their lord. Fierce Hyllus threaten'd high, and face to face affronted Turnus in the middle space. The prince encounter'd him in full career, and at his temples aim'd the deadly spear. So fatally the flying weapon sped, that thro' his helm it pierc'd his head. Nor, Cisseus, couldst thou scape from Turnus' hand, in vain the strongest of th' Arcadian band. Nor to Cupentus could his gods afford availing aid against th' Aenean sword. which to his naked heart pursued the course, nor could his plated shield sustain the force. Aeolus fell, whom not the Grecian powers, nor great subverter of the Trojan towers, were doom'd to kill, while heav'n prolong'd his date. But who can pass the bounds prefix'd by fate? In high Lyrnessus and in Troy he held 2 palaces, and was from each expell'd. Of all the mighty man, the last remains a little spot of foreign earth contains. And now both hosts their broken troops unite in equal ranks, and mix in mortal fight. Seresthus and undaunted Mnestheus join the Trojan, Tuscan, and Arcadian line. Sea-born Messapus with Atinas heads the Latin squadrons, and to battle leads. They strike, they push, they throng the scanty space, resolv'd on death, impatient of disgrace. And where one falls, another fills his place. The Cyprian goddess now inspires her son to leave th' unfinish'd fight, and storm the town. For while he rolls his eyes around the plain in quest of Turnus, whom he seeks in vain, he views th' unguarded city from afar, in careless quiet, and secure of war. Occasion offers, and excites his mind to dare beyond the task he first design'd. Resolv'd, he calls his chiefs; they leave the fight. Attended thus, he takes a neighb'ring height. The crowding troops about their general stand, all under arms, and wait his high command. Then thus the lofty prince: "Hear and obey, ye Trojan bands, without the least delay. Jove is with us, and what I have decreed requires our utmost vigour and our speed. Your instant arms against the town prepare, the source of mischief and the seat of war. This day the Latian towers that mate the skies shall level with the plain in ashes lie. The people shall be slaves, unless in time they kneel for pardon and repent their crime. Twice have our foes been vanquish'd on the plain; then shall I wait till Turnus will be slain? Your force against the perjur'd city bend. There it began, and there the war shall end. The peace profan'd our rightful arms requires. Cleanse the polluted place with purging fires." He finish'd, and one soul, inspiring all, form'd in a wedge the foot approach the wall. Without the town an unprovided train of gaping, gazing citizens are slain. Some firebrands, others scaling ladders bear, and those they toss aloft, and these they rear. The flames now launch'd, the feather'd arrows fly, and clouds of missive arms obscure the sky. Advancing to the front, the hero stands, and, stretching out to heav'n his pious hands, attests the gods, asserts his innocence, upbraids with breach of faith the Ausonian prince, declares the royal honour doubly stain'd, and twice the rites of holy peace profan'd. Dissenting clamours in the town arise; each will be heard, and all at once advise. One part for peace, and one for war contends. Some would exclude their foes, and some admit their friends. The helpless king is hurried in the throng, and whate'er tide prevails is borne along. Thus, when the swain within a hollow rock invades the bees with suffocating smoke, they run around, or labour on their wings, disus'd to flight, and shoot their sleepy stings. To shun the bitter fumes in vain they try; black vapours issuing from the vent involve the sky. But fate and envious fortune now prepare to plunge the Latins in the last despair. The queen, who saw the foes invade the town, and brands on tops of burning houses thrown, cast round her eyes, distracted with her fear. No troops of Turnus in the field appear. Once more she stares abroad, but still in vain, and then concludes the royal youth is slain. Mad with her anguish, impotent to bear the mighty grief, she loathes the vital air, and calls herself the cause of all this ill, and owns the dire effects of her ungovern'd will. She raves against the gods, she beats her breast, she tears with both her hands her purple vest. Then round a beam a running noose she tied, and, fasten'd by the neck, obscenely died. Soon as the fatal news by fame was blown, and to her dames and to her daughter known, the sad Lavinia rends her yellow hair and rosy cheeks; the rest her sorrow share. With shrieks the palace rings, and madness of despair. The spreading rumour fills the public place; confusion, fear, distraction, and disgrace, and silent shame are seen in every face. Latinus tears his garments as he goes, Both for his public and his private woes. With filth his venerable beard besmears, And sordid dust deforms his silver hairs. And much he blames the softness of his mind, Obnoxious to the charms of womankind, And soon seduc'd to change what he so well design'd, To break the solemn league so long desir'd, Nor finish what his fates and those of Troy requir'd. Now Turnus rolls aloof o'er empty plains, And here and there some straggling foes he gleans. His flying coursers please him less and less, Asham'd of easy fight and cheap success. Thus half contented, anxious in his mind, The distant cries come driving in the wind; Shouts from the walls, but shouts in murmurs drown'd, A jarring mixture, and a boding sound. "Alas!" said he, "what mean these dismal cries? What doleful clamours from the town arise?" Confus'd, he stops, and backward pulls the reins. She, who the driver's office now sustains, Replies: "Neglect, my lord, these new alarms. Here fight, and urge the fortune of your arms. There want not others to defend the wall. If by your rival's hand th' Italians fall, So shall your fatal sword his friends oppress, In honour equal, equal in success." To this the prince: "O sister, for I knew the peace infring'd proceeded first from you, I knew you, when you mingled first in fight, And now in vain you would deceive my sight. Why, goddess, this unprofitable care? Who sent you down from heav'n, involv'd in air, Your share of mortal sorrows to sustain, And see your brother bleeding on the plain? For to what pow'r can Turnus have recourse, Or how resist his fate's prevailing force? These eyes beheld Murranus bite the ground; Mighty the man, and mighty was the wound. I heard my dearest friend, with dying breath, My name invoking to revenge his death. Brave Ufens fell with honour on the place, To shun the shameful sight of my disgrace. On earth supine a manly corpse he lies; His vest and armour are the victor's prize. Then shall I see Laurentum in a flame, Which only wanted to complete my shame? How will the Latins hoot their champion's flight! How Drances will insult and point them to the sight! Is death so hard to bear? Ye gods below, Since those above so small compassion show, Receive a soul unsullied yet with shame, Which not belies my great forefather's name." He said, and while he spoke, with flying speed Came Sages, urging on his foamy steed. Fix'd on his wounded face a shaft he bore, And seeking Turnus, sent his voice before: "Turnus, on you alone depends our last relief. Compassionate your friends. Like lightning, fierce Aeneas, rolling on, With arms and vests, with flames invades the town. The brands are toss'd on high; the winds conspire To drive along the deluge of the fire. All eyes are fix'd on you; your foes rejoice. Even the king staggers, and suspends his choice; Doubts to deliver or defend the town, Whom to reject, or whom to call his son. The queen, on whom your utmost hopes were plac'd, Herself suborning death, has breath'd her last. 'Tis true, Messapus, fearless of his fate, With fierce Atinas' aid defends the gate. On every side surrounded by the foe, The more they kill, the greater numbers grow. An iron harvest mounts, and still remains to mow. You, far aloof from your forsaken bands, Your rolling chariot drive o'er empty sands." Stupid he sate, his eyes on earth declin'd, And various cares revolving in his mind; Rage boiling from the bottom of his breast, And sorrow mix'd with shame his soul oppress'd. And conscious worth lay labouring in his thought, and love by jealousy to madness wrought. By slow degrees his reason drove away the mists of passion, and resum'd her sway. Then rising on his car, he turn'd his look, and saw the town involv'd in fire and smoke. A wooden tow'r with flames already blaz'd, which his own hands on beams and rafters rais'd, and bridges laid above to join the space, and wheels below to roll from place to place. "Sister, the fates have vanquish'd. Let us go the way which Heav'n and my hard fortune show. The fight is fix'd, nor shall the branded name of a base coward blot your brother's fame. Death is my choice; but suffer me to try my force, and vent my rage before I die." He said, and, leaping down without delay, thro' crowds of scatter'd foes he freed his way. Striding he pass'd, impetuous as the wind, and left the grieving goddess far behind. As when a fragment from a mountain torn by raging tempests, or by torrents borne, or sapp'd by time, or loosen'd from the roots, prone thro' the void the rocky ruin shoots. Rolling from crag to crag, from steep to steep, down sink at once the shepherds and their sheep. Involv'd alike they rush to nether ground; stunn'd with the shock they fall, and stunn'd from earth rebound. So Turnus, hasting headlong to the town, should'ring and shoving, bore the squadrons down. Still pressing onward, to the walls he drew, where shafts and spears and darts promiscuous flew, and sanguine streams the slippery ground embrue. First stretching out his arm in sign of peace, he cries aloud to make the combat cease: "Rutulians, hold, and Latin troops, retire! The fight is mine, and me the gods require. 'Tis just that I should vindicate alone the broken truce, or for the breach atone. This day shall free from wars th' Ausonian state, or finish my misfortunes in my fate." Both armies from their bloody work desist, and bearing backward form a spacious list. The Trojan hero, who receiv'd from fame the welcome sound, and heard the champion's name, soon leaves the taken works and mounted walls, greedy of war where greater glory calls. He springs to fight, exulting in his force; his jointed armour rattles in the course. Like Eryx, or like Athos great he shows, or Father Apennine, when, white with snows, his head divine obscure in clouds he hides, and shakes the sounding forest on his sides. The nations, overawed, surcease the fight; immovable their bodies, fix'd their sight. Ev'n death stands still, nor from above they throw their darts, nor drive their battering rams below. In silent order either army stands, and drop their swords, unknowing, from their hands. Th' Ausonian king beholds, with wond'ring sight, two mighty champions match'd in single fight, born under climes remote, and brought by fate, with swords to try their titles to the state. Now in closed field each other from afar they view, and rushing on, begin the war. They launch their spears, then hand to hand they meet; the trembling soil resounds beneath their feet. Their bucklers clash, thick blows descend from high, and flakes of fire from their hard helmets fly. Courage conspires with chance, and both engage with equal fortune yet, and mutual rage. As when two bulls for their fair female fight in Scylla's shades, or on Taberna's height. With horns adverse they meet; the keeper flies; mute stands the herd; the heifers roll their eyes, and wait th' event, which victor they shall bear, and who shall be the lord to rule the lusty year. With rage of love the jealous rivals burn, and push for push, and wound for wound return. Their dewlaps gor'd, their sides are lav'd in blood; loud cries and roaring sounds rebellow thro' the wood. Such was the combat in the listed ground; so clash their swords, and so their shields resound. Jove sets the beam; in either scale he lays the champion's fate, and each exactly weighs. On this side life and lucky chance ascends; Loaded with death, that other scale descends. Raised on the stretch, young Turnus aims a blow full on the helm of his unguarded foe. Shrill shouts and clamours ring on either side, as hopes and fears their panting hearts divide. But all in pieces flies the traitor sword, and in the middle stroke deserts his lord. Now is but death or flight. Disarm'd he flies, when in his hand an unknown hilt he spies. Fame says that Turnus, when his steeds he join'd, hurrying to war, disorder'd in his mind, snatch'd the first weapon which his haste could find. 'Twas not the fated sword his father bore, but that his charioteer Metiscus wore. This, while the Trojans fled, the toughness held, but vain against the great Vulcanian shield. The mortal temper'd steel deceiv'd his hand; the shiver'd fragments shone amid the sand. Surprised with fear, he fled along the field, and now forthright, and now in orbits wheel'd. For here the Trojan troops the list surround, and there the pass is closed with pools and marshy ground. Aeneas hastens, though with heavier pace; his wound, so newly knit, retards the chase, and oft his trembling knees their aid refuse, yet pressing foot by foot his foe pursues. Thus, when a fearful stag is clos'd around with crimson toils, or in a river found, high on the bank the deep-mouth'd hound appears, still opening, following still where'er he steers. The persecuted creature, to and fro, turns here and there to 'scape his Umbrian foe. Steep is the ascent, and, if he gains the land, the purple death is pitch'd along the strand. His eager foe, determin'd to the chase, stretch'd at his length, gains ground at every pace. Now to his beamy head he makes his way, and now he holds, or thinks he holds, his prey. Just at the pinch, the stag springs out with fear; he bites the wind, and fills his sounding jaws with air. The rocks, the lakes, the meadows ring with cries; the mortal tumult mounts, and thunders in the skies. Thus flies the Daunian prince, and, flying, blames his tardy troops, and, calling by their names, demands his trusty sword. The Trojan threats the realm with ruin, and their ancient seats to lay in ashes, if they dare supply with arms or aid his vanquish'd enemy. Thus menacing, he still pursues the course with vigour, though diminish'd of his force. 10 times already round the listed place one chief had fled, and the other given the chase. No trivial prize is play'd, for on the life or death of Turnus now depends the strife. Within the space an olive tree had stood, a sacred shade, a venerable wood. For vows to Faunus paid, the Latins' guardian god, here hung the vests, and tablets were engraved, of sinking mariners from shipwrack saved. With heedless hands the Trojans fell'd the tree, to make the ground enclosed for combat free. Deep in the root, whether by fate or chance, or erring haste, the Trojan drove his lance; then stoop'd, and tugg'd with force immense, to free th' encumbered spear from the tenacious tree. That, whom his fainting limbs pursued in vain, his flying weapon might from far attain. Confused with fear, bereft of human aid, then Turnus to the gods, and first to Faunus pray'd. O Faunus, pity, and thou Mother Earth, where I, thy foster son, receiv'd my birth, hold fast the steel, if my religious hand your plant has honour'd, which your foes profaned. Propitious hear my pious prayer. He said, nor with successless vows invoked their aid. The incumbent hero wrench'd, and pull'd, and strain'd, but still the stubborn earth the steel detained. Juturna took her time, and, while in vain he strove, assum'd Meticus' form again, and in that imitated shape restor'd to the despairing prince his Daunian sword. The queen of love, who, with disdain and grief, saw the bold nymph afford this prompt relief, to assert her offspring with a greater deed, from the tough root the ling'ring weapon freed. Once more erect, the rival chiefs advance; one trusts the sword, and one the pointed lance, and both resolved alike to try their fatal chance. Meantime imperial Jove to Juno spoke, who from a shining cloud beheld the shock. "What new arrest, O Queen of Heav'n, is sent To stop the Fates now lab'ring in th' event? What farther hopes are left thee to pursue? Divine Aeneas, and thou know'st it too, Foredoom'd to these celestial seats are due. What more attempts for Turnus can be made, That thus thou linger'st in this lonely shade? Is it becoming of the due respect And awful honour of a god elect, A wound unworthy of our state to feel, Patient of human hands and earthly steel? Or seems it just the sister should restore A second sword, when one was lost before, And arm a conquer'd wretch against his conqueror? For what, without thy knowledge and avow, Nay more, thy dictate durst Juturna do? At last, in deference to my love, forbear To lodge within thy soul this anxious care. Reclin'd upon my breast, thy grief unload. Who should relieve the goddess but the god? Now all things to their utmost issue tend, Push'd by the Fates to their appointed end. While leave was given thee, and a lawful hour For vengeance, wrath, and unresisted pow'r, Toss'd on the seas thou couldst thy foes distress, And, driven ashore, with hostile arms oppress, Deform the royal house, and from the side Of the just bridegroom tear the plighted bride. Now cease at my command." The Thund'rer said, and, with dejected eyes, This answer Juno made: "Because your dread decree too well I knew, From Turnus and from earth unwilling I withdrew. Else should you not behold me here alone, Involv'd in empty clouds, my friends bemoan; But, girt with vengeful flames, in open sight, Engag'd against my foes in mortal fight. 'Tis true, Juturna mingled in the strife, By my command, to save her brother's life, At least to try; but, by the Stygian lake, The most religious oath the gods can take, With this restriction, not to bend the bow, Or toss the spear, or trembling dart to throw. And now, resign'd to your superior might, And tir'd with fruitless toils, I loathe the fight. This let me beg, and this no fates withstand, Both for myself and for your father's land, That, when the nuptial bed shall bind the peace, Which I, since you ordain, consent to bless, The laws of either nation be the same, But let the Latins still retain their name, Speak the same language which they spoke before, Wear the same habits which their grandsires wore. Call them not Trojans; perish the renown And name of Troy with that detested town. Latium be Latium still; let Alba reign, And Rome's immortal majesty remain." Then thus the founder of mankind replies. Unruffled was his front, serene his eyes. "Can Saturn's issue, and heav'n's other heir, Such endless anger in her bosom bear? Be mistress, and your full desires obtain, But quench the choler you foment in vain. From ancient blood th' Ausonian people sprung, Shall keep their name, their habit, and their tongue. The Trojans to their customs shall be tied; I will myself their common rites provide. The natives shall command, the foreigners subside. All shall be Latium, Troy without a name, And her lost sons forget from whence they came. From blood so mix'd, a pious race shall flow, Equal to gods, excelling all below. No nation more respect to you shall pay, Or greater off'rings on your altars lay." Juno consents, well pleas'd that her desires Had found success, and from the cloud retires. The peace thus made, the Thund'rer next repairs To force the watery goddess from the wars. Deep in the dismal regions, void of light, 3 daughters at a birth were born to night. These their brown mother, brooding on her care, Endued with windy wings to flit in air, With serpents girt alike, and crown'd with hissing hair. In heav'n the Dirae call'd, and still at hand, Before the throne of angry Jove they stand, His ministers of wrath, and ready still The minds of mortal men with fears to fill. whene'er the moody sire, to wreak his hate on realms or towns deserving of their fate, hurls down diseases, death, and deadly care, and terrifies the guilty world with war. One sister plague, if these from heav'n he sent, to fright Juturna with a dire portent. The pest comes whirling down; by far more slow springs the swift arrow from the Parthian bow, Archidon yew, when, traversing the skies, and drench'd in pois'nous juice, the sure destruction flies. With such a sudden and unseen a flight, shot thro' the clouds the daughter of the night. Soon as the field enclos'd she had in view, and from afar her destined quarry knew. Contracted to the boding bird she turns, which haunts the ruin'd piles and hallow'd urns, and beats about the tombs with nightly wings, where songs obscene on sepulchres she sings. Thus lessen'd in her form, with frightful cries, the Fury round unhappy Turnus flies, flaps on his shield, and flutters o'er his eyes. A lazy chillness crept along his blood, chok'd was his voice, his hair with horror stood. Juturna from afar beheld her fly, and knew th' ill omen by her screaming cry, and stridor of her wings. Amazed with fear, her beauteous breast she beat, and rent her flowing hair. "Ah me!" she cries, "in this unequal strife, what can thy sister more to save thy life? Weak as I am, can I, alas, contend in arms with that inexorable fiend? Now I quit the field; forbear to fright my tender soul, ye baleful birds of night. The lashing of your wings I know too well, the sounding flight and fun'ral screams of hell. These are the gifts you bring from haughty Jove, the worthy recompense of ravish'd love. Did he for this exempt my life from fate? O hard conditions of immortal state! Tho' born to death, not privileg'd to die, but forc'd to bear impos'd eternity. Take back your envious bribes, and let me go, companion to my brother's ghost below. The joys are vanish'd; nothing now remains Of life immortal, but immortal pains. What earth will open her devouring womb, to rest a weary goddess in the tomb?" She drew a length of sighs, nor more she said, But in her azure mantle wrapp'd her head; Then plunged into her stream with deep despair, And her last sobs came bubbling up in air. Now stern Aeneas his weighty spear against his foe, and thus upbraids his fear: "What farther subterfuge can Turnus find? What empty hopes are harbour'd in his mind? 'Tis not thy swiftness can secure thy flight; Not with their feet, but hands, the valiant fight. Vary thy shape in thousand forms, and dare What skill and courage can attempt in war. Wish for the wings of winds to mount the sky, Or hid within the hollow earth to lie." The champion shook his head, and made this short reply: "No threats of thine my manly mind can move. 'Tis hostile Heav'n I dread, and partial Jove." He said no more, but with a sigh repress'd the mighty sorrow in his swelling breast. Then, as he roll'd his troubled eyes around, an antique stone he saw, the common bound Of neighb'ring fields, and barrier of the ground. So vast, that 12 strong men of modern days th' enormous weight from earth could hardly raise. He heav'd it a lift, and, pois'd on high, ran stagg'ring on against his enemy; But so disorder'd, that he scarcely knew his way, or what unwieldy weight he threw. His knocking knees are bent beneath the load, and shiv'ring cold congeals his vital blood. The stone drops from his arms, and, falling short, For want of vigour mocks his vain effort. And as, when heavy sleep has clos'd the sight, The sickly fancy labours in the night, We seem to run, and, destitute of force, Our sinking limbs forsake us in the course. In vain we heave for breath, in vain we cry; The nerves, unbraced, their usual strength deny, And on the tongue the falt'ring accents die. So Turnus far'd. Whatever means he tried, all force of arms and points of art employ'd, the Fury flew athwart, and made th' endeavour void. 1,000 various thoughts his soul confound; he star'd about, nor aid nor issue found. His own men stop the pass, and his own walls surround. Once more he pauses, and looks out again, and seeks the goddess charioteer in vain. Trembling he views the thund'ring chief advance, and brandishing aloft the deadly lance. Amaz'd, he cowers beneath his conqu'ring foe, forgets to ward, and waits the coming blow. Astonish'd while he stands, and, fix'd with fear, aim'd at his shield, he sees th' impending spear. The hero measur'd first with narrow view the destined mark, and, rising as he threw, with its full swing the fatal weapon flew. Not with less rage the rattling thunder falls, or stones from batt'ring engines break the walls. Swift as a whirlwind from an arm so strong, the lance drove on, and bore the death along. Naught could his sevenfold shield the prince avail, nor aught beneath his arms the coat of mail. It pierc'd thro' all, and with a grisly wound transfix'd his thigh, and doubled him to ground. With groans the Latins rend the vaulted sky; woods, hills, and valleys to the voice reply. Now low on earth the lofty chief is laid, with eyes cast upward, and with arms display'd. And, recreant, thus to the proud victor pray'd: "I know my death deserv'd, nor hope to live. Use what the gods in thy good fortune give. Yet think, O think, if mercy may be shown. Thou hadst a father once, and hast a son. Pity my sire, now sinking to the grave, And for Anchises' sake old Daunus save. Or, if thy vow'd revenge pursue my death, Give to my friends my body void of breath. The Latian chiefs have seen me beg my life. Thine is the conquest, thine the royal wife. Against a yielded man 'tis mean ignoble strife." In deep suspense the Trojan seem'd to stand, And, just prepar'd to strike, repress'd his hand. He roll'd his eyes, and every moment felt His manly soul with more compassion melt. When, casting down a casual glance, he spied the golden belt that glitter'd on his side, the fatal spoils which haughty Turnus tore From dying Pallas, and in triumph wore. Then, rous'd anew to wrath, he loudly cries; Flames, while he spoke, came flashing from his eyes. "Traitor, dost thou to grace pretend, Clad as thou art in trophies of my friend? To his sad soul a grateful off'ring go! 'Tis Pallas, Pallas gives this deadly blow." He rais'd his arm aloft, and, at the word, Deep in his bosom drove the shining sword. The streaming blood distain'd his arms around, and the disdainful soul came rushing through the wound.